Instructional design suffers from a universal, high-pressure problem: high dropout rates. When developing e-learning, there is immense pressure to compete for attention against high-intensity digital media. Take a typical dry lesson, like a basic spreadsheet tutorial. Without intense visuals or gripping narratives, designers often feel desperate to hold the learner's interest. The common impulse is to inject trivia, historical anecdotes, and dramatic pop-ups, like the story of VisiCalc, to boost engagement. Or consider injecting extreme medical cases and dramatic 3D models into a standard pharmaceutical sales module to shock the learner into paying attention. This graph plots engagement content against knowledge transfer. As a designer adds content purely to entertain, a student's ability to retain and transfer knowledge mathematically collapses. The intuitive assumption of the e-learning industry is backwards. Trying to entertain the learner is the exact mechanism causing them to fail. Psychologists classify these interesting but irrelevant additions as seductive details. Adding them violates the coherence principle, a core tenet of multimedia learning, which dictates that instructional environments must remain entirely uncluttered. Protecting the learner requires a methodology called weeding, the ruthless elimination of any word, graphic, or sound that does not directly support the primary instructional goal. True instructional design is not defined by what you add to motivate a student. It is defined by what you have the discipline to remove to protect their focus. Consider a foundational medical study explaining how a cold virus enters the body. One group of students received a concise lesson. The other received the identical lesson padded with high-interest trivia about immunity and bedroom activity. This chart visualizes the massive performance gap on subsequent transfer tests. The students distracted by the engaging trivia suffered a drastic decline in actual understanding, yielding a negative effect size greater than 1. The same mathematical penalty appears with dynamic media. When researchers inserted highly stimulating video footage of lightning strikes into an animated lesson on atmospheric science, students who viewed the purely instructional animation without the dramatic footage solved 30. The cognitive theory of multimedia learning treats the human brain not as an infinite sponge, but as an information processing system governed by strict physical limits. The primary bottleneck is working memory, holding a very small number of items. Essential concepts must fill available capacity, but seductive details act as a hostile distraction. They hijack attention, push core concepts out, wedge between ideas, and force data into an incorrect framework. The brain does not possess the bandwidth to simultaneously process entertainment and construct complex new causal models. One inevitably cannibalizes the other. This severe limitation forces a critical question about the visual execution of the core lesson itself. How realistic should instructional graphics actually be? A medical textbook study compared learning outcomes from highly detailed, anatomically realistic illustrations against simplified, abstract line drawings. Students studying the simple, abstract drawings demonstrated a significantly better understanding of mechanical function than those who studied the highly realistic art. A dynamic equivalent tested this same variable, comparing realistic microscopic video footage of cellular mitosis against a basic factor animation. The sheer volume of visual noise in the realistic footage overwhelmed learners, causing them to fail at understanding the core biological process. Realistic graphics are only necessary if the primary learning goal is strict visual identification, like preparing a surgeon to recognize specific tissues. For teaching systems, processes, or concepts, visual complexity is a liability. Designers must abstract away reality to expose the underlying mechanics. Bloated design also carries heavy organizational costs, particularly the habit of adding extensive written elaborations to textbooks and digital modules. Reading comprehension data shows that padding a 200-word core concept into an 800-word expanded passage caused a massive, unjustified increase in the time required to complete the task. And despite that extra time on task, memory retention for the main ideas was significantly worse for the students reading the expanded version. In corporate and educational environments, padded modules burned thousands of paid staff hours for a net negative return on investment. If we must strip away extra text, videos, trivia, and realistic details, how do we prevent the material from being aggressively boring? The solution is emotional design, the technique of inducing positive affect in the learner without adding any extraneous cognitive load. Instead of bolting new entertaining elements onto the screen, designers alter the visual properties of the existing essential elements. Take a required diagram of a single cell. By shifting it from a sterile grayscale to warm, inviting colors, or adding subtle, human-like facial expressions to abstract shapes, the aesthetic transforms. These subtle aesthetic changes induce positive emotions, which lowers anxiety, and naturally primes the cognitive system to process the essential information more deeply, all without costing working memory. Learner engagement is never achieved by adding a circus of unrelated multimedia to a curriculum. Human working memory is a fragile, easily overwhelmed bottleneck that must be fiercely protected from distraction and seduction. True instructional elegance is achieved through pure coherence, presenting only what is strictly essential and designing it so optimally that the mind cannot look away.